The pattern that finally became clear. For years, the signs were there, scattered across moments that felt unrelated at the time. Small frustrations, repeated doubts, a familiar sense of restlessness that came and went without explanation. None of it seemed urgent. None of it demanded attention. Until one day, the pattern behind it all finally became impossible to ignore. At every stage of their career, they believed each challenge was isolated. A bad project, a mismatched role, an unfortunate timing issue. They solved the problem, moved forward, and assumed discomfort would disappear for good. But it never fully did. It only changed shape. And that's why this story matters today. 97, because many people mistake recurring signals for temporary setbacks. On the surface, progress was real. Titles improved. Skills expanded. Responsibilities grew. Each move looked like an upgrade, a step closer to something better. Yet the same feeling returned again and again. A quiet sense of misalignment that appeared once the novelty wore off, once the learning curve flattened, once the role became familiar. They told themselves it was normal. That ambition always comes with restlessness. That fulfillment arrives later, after enough progress is made. So they kept going, adjusting, optimizing, reframing, never stopping long enough to ask why the same dissatisfaction followed them from one chapter to the next. The realization began subtly. They noticed how often the same complaints resurfaced, even in different environments. How the same frustrations emerged under new titles. How the excitement of change always faded faster than expected. The circumstances varied, but the feeling didn't. At first, they resisted the implication. Seeing a pattern meant responsibility. It meant the issue might not be external. It might not be the job, the company, or the timing. And that possibility felt uncomfortable because it suggested the solution wasn't another move forward. 97. It was a deeper understanding. The moment the pattern began to form clearly, it challenged the belief they had relied on for years. That progress alone was enough. And once that belief cracked, everything else started to come into focus. Once the pattern revealed itself, it changed how they interpreted every past decision. What once felt like unrelated chapters now appeared connected, repeating the same cycle under different names. Initial excitement, rapid learning, a sense of momentum. Then, slowly disengagement. Not because of failure, 97, but because meaning faded. The conflict deepened as they questioned a long-held assumption. They had believed restlessness was a sign to move on, to aim higher, to find a better environment. But what if restlessness wasn't pointing outward at all? What if it was pointing inward, towards something unresolved they kept carrying with them? That possibility was unsettling. It meant the discomfort wasn't something to escape. 97, it was something to understand. And understanding it would require slowing down instead of accelerating, reflection instead of reaction. That went against everything they had practiced so far. They began revisiting key moments with new awareness. Times they left roles that still looked successful. Times they chased opportunity without clarity. Times they felt relief after changing paths, only for the same dissatisfaction to return later. The pattern wasn't random. It was consistent. And consistency, once seen, couldn't be unseen. The tension peaked when they realized how often they had optimized for progress instead of alignment. Each move solved the surface problem, but left the deeper question untouched. What kind of work actually sustains me? What kind of problems do I want to sit with long enough to matter? Those questions have been postponed repeatedly, buried under momentum. For the first time, they resisted the urge to act. No immediate pivot, no new plan, just observation. The pattern had finally become clear, and clarity demanded patience. Rushing now would only repeat the cycle again. The realization carried weight, because patterns don't accuse, they instruct. And this one was asking them to change not where they were going 97, but how they decided where to go at all. Sitting with the pattern was harder than chasing the next move. Without action to distract them, the discomfort grew sharper. The realization demanded accountability. If the same dissatisfaction kept returning, then progress alone was no longer the answer. Something fundamental had been overlooked. The conflict reached its peak as they confronted a difficult truth. They had been choosing roles based on momentum, not meaning. Each decision optimized for growth, visibility, or opportunity 97, but rarely for sustainability. They were skilled at moving forward, but unpracticed at staying aligned. This recognition stirred fear. If the pattern wasn't external, then changing environments wouldn't solve it. The solution would require changing how they evaluated work itself, what they valued, what they avoided, what they were willing to endure long-term. And that level of honesty felt risky because it threatened the identity they had built around progress. The emotional tension intensified when they imagined repeating the cycle again. Another move, another fresh start, another honeymoon phase followed by quiet disengagement. The thought was exhausting, not because change was hard, 97, but because repeating it without learning felt pointless. The turning point arrived with clarity rather than urgency. They understood that the pattern was not a failure. It was feedback, a signal pointing toward a mismatch between how they worked and what they actually needed to feel fulfilled. The discomfort they kept outrunning had been trying to teach them something all along. Once that clicked, the pattern lost its power to frustrate. It became useful, informative. It revealed boundaries they hadn't defined and values they hadn't honored. And for the first time, they saw a way out that didn't involve running forward blindly. The cycle wouldn't break through speed. It would break through intention. And that realization marked the moment the pattern stopped repeating 97 and started guiding. With intention replacing urgency, their decisions began to change shape. They stopped chasing novelty and started evaluating depth. Instead of asking whether a role looked like progress, they asked whether it could hold their attention long enough to matter, whether it aligned with the values the pattern had finally revealed. The shift was subtle but transformative. They became more selective, not less ambitious. Opportunities that once felt exciting now felt familiar in an unhelpful way. Others, quieter and less obvious, stood out because they offered room to stay, not just room to advance. For the first time, longevity became a feature, not a compromise. As they moved forward, the pattern that once frustrated them became a compass. When restlessness appeared, they didn't panic. They listened. They examined whether it was signaling misalignment or simply discomfort from growth. That distinction changed everything. It allowed them to stay through difficulty without staying through emptiness. Over time, the cycle finally broke, not because work became perfect, but because it became honest. They chose problems they were willing to wrestle with over time, environments that rewarded curiosity over constant movement, paths that didn't promise endless excitement, but offered meaning through engagement. Looking back, they understood why the pattern had taken so long to reveal itself. It required perspective. It required repetition. And most of all, it required the courage to stop blaming circumstances and start examining choices. Once they did, the pattern stopped being a trap. It became guidance. The clarity they gained didn't just change their career. It changed how they would approach every decision that followed. Not with urgency, not with fear, but with awareness. Sometimes a breakthrough isn't discovering something new. It's finally understanding what's been repeating all along. Subscribe to join the journey. The